Story 1. In college, I used to work as a teacher in a daycare that wasn't great in terms of management. Oftentimes, they aren't. My manager in particular was pretty bad. She had a militant, strict rule that teachers were not to communicate with the parents if she wasn't present. No phone numbers were ever to be shared with a parent. If we had an issue, we were to tell her, and she would inform the parents. Failure to comply would be met with termination. Obviously, every teacher broke this rule. You need to talk with the parents about kids for their own peace of mind, as well as problem-solving behavioral issues. Let them know that their kids need certain items. Let them know your concerns. We never spoke about it. Anyways, boss lady had it out for me. I really did try my best, but she gave me $0 for a supply budget. Made things as simple as getting someone to watch the kids while I took one down the hall for the restroom. Not possible, and refused to report abusive behavioral disorder symptoms. Once COVID started, the chaotic and fun world of daycare became a nightmare. All of my 3-year-old students were given to the preschool teacher due to low attendance in her class, and I was given the school-age students, 12 kids ages 5-10. About 75% of them had Zoom meetings all day for their classes, the other didn't. It was a nightmare trying to keep a single room, probably about 15x30. With all of them, it had to be dead quiet for the ones in class to focus, but also somehow fun enough to keep the ones not in class occupied enough to stay quiet. Oh, and all the classes were at different time slots, and we only were allowed to leave the room for lunch and outside time, about an hour a day. Despite this, I managed. All of my students were at the top of their classes and got high marks. The parents and I would slip each other notes, and they would let me know how happy they were to see how I kept their kids' schoolwork organized, how I taught even the 5-year-olds to access their computers and get on Zoom meetings unassisted. I made the links bookmarked in Chrome and used emojis for each class, paired with an on-screen alarm that would let them know that it was time to click on that class, etc., etc. I decided to quit due to a better job opportunity, and I couldn't take the boss treating my kids so poorly and calling us out for mistakes in a weekly notice that was distributed staff-wide, like, Miss X did this, it caused this problem, don't be like her. The final straw was when a parent was emailing her and to pass along their praise for me teaching their son how to use a computer. She accused me of somehow asking them to say it in the newsletter, stating to everyone that staff shouldn't ask parents to praise us to her, as it was manipulation. I did no such thing. Who would do that, lol? Now the revenge part. When I let my boss know that I was quitting, she told me that I was not to tell anyone that I was leaving. My students, being older, of course figured this out because she was standing in front of my whole class telling me this. They were understandably upset because, I hung around with them all day and cared for them and stuff. A few of them told their parents, and suddenly I was getting secret notes asking when I was leaving, whether I liked chocolate, etc. They weren't allowed in the building due to the pandemic, so all we had were the notes and the occasional secret conversation at the fence on the playground. I didn't care about my boss rule and let every student know that I would miss them and gave each of them a going-away present from the dollar store. The revenge came on my last day when so many parents stopped by with gift cards, candy, thank you notes and drawings. And my poor boss had to walk them down to me in my classroom. One by one, pandemic rules, yeet. She got mad each time that she had to act so happy to see them praising me and bring me their gifts, one by one. Her parting words to me were good luck in my endeavors, and that I was never welcome back. I still have some of their drawings and cards from the parents. I hope all of my students are doing okay. I miss the little ones. I hope they remember me. I hope my ex-boss remembers the walks of shame. Story 2. This happened a few years ago, and by few I mean a lot. I was a student in the mid-'80s, and I got a job for the summer working for a major electronics company. It was low-skill, boring grunt work, but it was a foot in the door and paid good money. I worked in the IT department next to a very noisy room filled with very wide dot matrix printers that buzzed and chattered all day long. It was the central printer room for the VAX system that we used back then. One of my jobs was to take the huge fan fold printout. Each stack was about 2x1 feet, and about a foot high, and separate it into individual print jobs. Lay them out on a table for people to pick up and also to refill the printer with new paper. The noise drove me nuts, so I closed the door. The manager found out and insisted that the door stay open so that I could hear when a printer was out of paper. The printer gave out a series of beeps when the paper had run out. Let's just call him Richard, a real petty tyrant. In a nearby room was Bob. Bob was an odd guy. He was an absolute hippie, a relic from the 60s. Bob was a slacker. He appeared to do the minimum work necessary to stay employed, but he was also a genius, a hobby electronics experimenter, proper old-school coder, COBOL and Fortran, radio amateur. He wrote for electronics magazines, designed and built his own computers, radios and hi-fi gear. He would happily fix any electronics you brought him and refused payment, and he was the go-to person for almost anyone in the company with a technical problem. The odder the problem, the better he liked it. Senior engineers would come down to Bob with a question and go away with an answer. Sometimes he was seconded to a project to consult, and on more than one occasion co-authored a technical paper and was named on a patent or two. Most of the time Bob didn't want any recognition or fuss, but usually you got to hear through the grapevine that it was his work. He liked his little room and liked to be his own boss. I liked Bob. He was a genuinely nice guy. He had a lot of power in the company through a lot of favors, but he never wielded it. He was always helpful to anyone who asked, from MD to summer students like me. In fact, he really liked students and often mentored us when we had a problem or just taught us how to work the system. I told Bob about the noise in passing. Bob went away and designed a remote out-of-paper system that would indicate a paper outage on a light board where I sat. He didn't have to, but Bob liked a problem to work on. Richard rejected it out of hand. I resigned myself to a summer of noise, but Bob just quietly turned to a new solution. Bob proposed an improvement to the printing system to Richard. The print header was a line of hash symbols, the print job name, the username of the person who printed it, and another line of hash symbols. Sometimes you could pick up on the hash symbols, sometimes not. It was hit or miss. Bob had experimented with a mix of text and ASCII block characters and came up with a distinctive song that the printers could make by printing apparent gibberish. Based on his amateur radio experience, he theorized that even someone untutored in Morse can recognize a Morse code phrase very quickly, and the ear picks up on the phrase, even when not actively listening, and so someone could pick up on a distinctive tune or rhythm. He ran a test, and it worked. Richard could see the benefits and so authorized Bob to code it into the standard print footer. In production, I could hear the end of every print job as the printer changed its random screeching buzz to the distinctive sounds, and I pulled them off the printer as they finished instead of the finished paper stack, speeding up the print job process and reducing the wait time for those waiting on the job. Richard was nominated for an Innovation Award, about £200 bonus, and accepted without acknowledging Bob. Bob didn't care, and neither did I. After my ear had tuned in, Bob gave me a Morse alphabet and just smiled at me. He had coded symbols for 2 lines at the end of the print that sounded like jerk in Morse code. It didn't reduce the noise, but it made it bearable that every print job was an insult. It also made me happy that there were a few radio amateurs in the company who all know Morse. They all knew Bob, so I guess he told them. When they came to the print pickup point, you could see some of them catch the phrase and smile. Sometimes it is the petty revenges that mean the most. I rejoined the company after I graduated 3 years later. Richard had moved on, and we were beginning to move to the massive computing power of desktop 386 PCS with local printers instead of the VAX system, but I went down to the print room one day to hear jerk over and over. It made me so happy. Story 3. So, unfortunately, I was a nursing supervisor at a psychiatric corrections hospital. I had a Karen nurse who blatantly told me her dog is more important than her human patients. Our shifts were 7 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. But this nurse, Karen, consistently came in late, around 7:30 p.m., and lost it if her replacement wasn't there by 7:10 p.m. She frequently complained that her ancient dog, about 15 years old, needed insulin, and was absolutely convinced he would die if she was even 5 minutes late in giving him his injection. She even told me one night that, "I am not going to just let my dog die, so you better send someone to relieve me by 7:15 or I'm walking out." Now, nurses can't just leave without giving a report and turning over their patients to another nurse. To do so is considered patient abandonment and can cost her her license. She told me she didn't care if I reported her to the LLR, because her dog was more important. To top it off, this Karen insists on playing BBC religious radio via the internet for her entire shift. Technically not within policy, but she got so Karen aggressive to anyone who tried to complain that they were religiously persecuting her for criticizing her choice of entertainment while at work. Now that you have some backstory on Karen 1, let me introduce you to Karen 2. Now, this girl was a mental health tech, MHT. Pretty much, on night shift her responsibilities were to not sleep on the job until the 5:30 am med pass and morning vital signs. Occasionally, they might be asked to sit on a special observation, requiring them to document on a form every 15 minutes. Easy peasy, right? So I was the house nursing supervisor in charge of staffing all the units with an appropriate number of nurses and MHTs. But we'd had multiple call-outs. I will never understand why people call out on payday. So, around 10 p.m., I told Karen 2 that, when you get relieved from the monitor room at 11 p.m., I need you to go directly to Unit 1. I have 2 techs there who have been working for 16 hours, and they need to go home. They'd basically been mandated to stay the extra 4 hours, but legally I couldn't force them to work more than 16 hours. Karen 2, who is snacking on trail mix, says, "Well, but I'm hungry and I want to take my lunch break at 11 p.m. I told her, I understand that, and I will try to arrange for someone to come break you for lunch as soon as possible after changing shifts. But those techs have been here for 16 hours, and they need to get home. Do not take a break before going to the unit. I'll send someone to break you as soon as I can." 12 m, Karen 1, calls me. "I thought you were going to send me a tech. I've had to sit for the last hour on this special observation patient, and that's not my job." Apparently, Karen 1 was kind enough to let the 2 techs who had been there for 16 hours go home, but then didn't tell me the replacement hadn't shown up until she'd worked herself into quite the tizzy. I specifically told the tech to report to your unit as soon as possible after being relieved in the monitor room. Maybe security forgot to relieve her. I'll call you back. I told her then hang up. I called the monitor room, and they stated the officer had relieved Karen 2 around 11:15 p.m. But she said she was going on break. I finally found her and called her to my office around 12:20 m. I was furious. So, admittedly, I asked, "Where have you been? I specifically told you at 10 p.m. not to take a break because I needed you to relieve staff who have been here for 16 hours. Karen 2 then begins wailing that I cursed at her, and I'm so disrespectful, that she was just hungry and just needed a bite to eat because she hadn't eaten all day. Okay, I was a little cold, but I was livid. It's not my problem that you chose not to eat all day. You were snacking in the monitor room when I told you at 10 p.m. not to take a break before relieving the techs who have been working for 16 hours. I told you I would have someone break you as soon as possible after the change of shift." Karen 2 continued to wail that she was just hungry and just needed to have a bite to eat, even though she was ghost for almost an hour. I told her I didn't care, and she was selfish for making coworkers stay longer than 16 hours because she couldn't wait to take her break. I warned her that I would be writing her up for disobeying a direct order, and she stomped off, angrily wiping at her tears, saying she was going to complain to HR and corporate about me. About 15 minutes later, I got a call from Karen 1. "You'd better come get this witch off my unit, right now. Please understand that staff tension was high. The central AC had failed, and the huge industrial fans they had on units were barely effective at moving the hot air. Heading to the unit, I could hear, from 10 feet away, over the roar of the industrial fan and steel fire doors, Karen 1 and Karen 2 screaming at each other. I immediately told Karen 2, the tech, to leave the unit and go to my office. Then I asked the nurse, Karen 1, why they were screaming at each other. Karen 1 was angry because she'd had to sit on that special observation patient since 11 p.m., and claimed the tech was rude and unprofessional, probably true, and claimed the tech assaulted her. How? I asked. She told me that the tech exited the nursing station so forcefully that the door, as it was closing, hit Karen 1, who wouldn't have been hit at all if she hadn't been hot on the heels of Karen 2, and she saw that as assault. Now then, I had to get Karen 2's side of the story. Karen 2, from security footage, stormed onto the unit. When she went to sit down on the special observation patient, she noticed that Karen 1 had used the very last spot on the documentation form, but there was no new form to continue documentation available on the clipboard. When Karen 2 asked for a blank form, she doesn't usually work on that unit, so wouldn't know where that unit keeps their documents. She said Karen 1 told her to find it yourself, which I believe. Now, to understand this rabbit hole, you have to understand that Karen 1 is an entitled older white woman who believes her pets are way more important than any human. She is willfully computer illiterate, so doesn't document in the computer as required. And she shakes like a nervous chihuahua at any and every incident that interrupts her BBC religious radio time. So of course Karen 2 is one of those entitled millennials who happens to be black and is quick to claim racism. I don't know exactly what slurs were slung between them, but I do believe Karen 1 to be racist, and I've witnessed her being purposely hateful to staff and patients. They were both in the wrong, but I chose to send Karen 2 home. This was the second major infraction in one night, and I just didn't have a nurse to cover if I sent Karen 1 home. Nevertheless, Karen 2 boo-hooed in a corner for an additional hour until I threatened to have her removed by security. Story 4. So I work at a zoo in the Midwest USA. It is my favorite place in the whole world. I have worked here as a volunteer, then as an intern, currently working at the membership desk, and have applied to work with our education department. I have been working there since maybe I was 14, and know most of this zoo's inner workings better than my own home. I even have a few animals who recognize me for better or worse. We have an Australia exhibit. As an intern, I did a lot of work with the Wallabies, as such a lot of them sort of recognize me and show greater comfortability with my presence. Especially one of the younger females, Ruby. All of our Wallabies are pretty cautious animals, as they are in nature. Ruby, on the other hand, is much rambunctious. Our Australia exhibit is free range for them, and a pair of black swans. It's lovely, and they have a bunch of scattered hangouts. Most of these spots are away from the path and away from guests, but one is very close to the door. Ruby likes to spend her time here. Her first day on exhibit, she walked up behind a 4-year-old and sniffed him while this kid petted her. I'm not shocked they're about the same size and hardly seem a threat. But she's also gone up to adults, pulled on a pocket flap, and scampered off. She frequently walks up to me and I talk to her while she stares at me. She is an unusual girl, but I love her to death and back. Now that I don't work down there anymore, I don't see her as often, but I like to make regular trips to say hello. She is a little bigger now than the photo provided, but wallabies don't get terribly big. She's still sweet as ever, and she will still come up to say hello. Recently, I'm down there squatting as I speak to her. She's looking at me. I'm happy as can be. It's not a terribly busy day. The weather is kind of cold, so there are maybe 10 groups in the entire zoo. I heard a mother and her 2 kids come in. I'm speaking to Ruby for a bit. I can hear her scoff and talking to her kids, when suddenly I hear someone running. I assume it's the kids. Ruby glances over, and I'm about to as well when I see the woman's foot collide with Ruby. I yelled in horror as Ruby went down. She twitched, stunned by the unwarranted assault. I spring up and immediately am standing over her, shoving this woman away. I'm a good 6'2" and pretty overweight, but reasonably strong. She already looks pissed. She's 4 foot at least, and a bit of a pudgy woman. She begins screaming at me. Entitled mother, how dare you touch me? Me, you just kicked my wallaby. Yes, I said she's one of my best friends. Entitled mother, you're oversized robot rat. How dare you spread these lies to kids? You and your children need to leave right now. I'm not going anywhere, not till you stop spreading your lies, you brat. Ruby at this point recovers and scampers off. The woman attempts to kick her by kicking between my legs and instead kicks me. Me, oh you crazy witch, stop it. Entitled mother screams incomprehensibly at the top of her lungs, geez, the lungs on that woman, and continues doing so, with nothing I say being heard, until our awesome security guard shows up, a keeper in tow. Security guard, what's wrong? Is she okay? Did the swan bite her? Black swan bites were the only animal attacks we really ever had. Me, she kicked Ruby. Keeper, what? Security guard, who? The Wallaby. The entitled mother shouts, this brat just assaulted me, arrest him right now. Security guard deals with psychos like this every once in a while, mostly anti-maskers though. Miss, you need to come with me. About this time, I realize the kids are gone. One is over at the kookaburra enclosure. The other is nowhere to be seen. He apparently wandered off to the petting zoo and got spit on by the llama, which he thought was the funniest thing, which caught the attendant down there's attention, as this rat was alone. We were trying to drag her and her other kid out, who kept making kookaburra calls, best to his ability. She yelled about our lies, then suddenly took off and ran at one of the large groups of wallabies. Now this is a bad idea, cause the wallabies are now on high alert, and there were a couple of the babies and 2 pregnant females in this group. This set them off. 3 of them begin attacking her by kicking at her, similar to how a kangaroo does, but less effective. She starts screaming as they growl and kick at her. Such a glorious sight as she runs back to the entrance of the exhibit wailing. A couple wallabies giving chase, bless their tiny hearts. Later the security guard pieced together that she was some flat earth fanatic, and apparently Australia and turn everything in the Australia exhibit is not real, justifying her kicking Ruby. But we technically had no right to hold her and call the cops. We could, as our policy stated, eject her, until I mentioned she kicked me. So cops were called, and she's dragged off after we explained to the cops what this witch did. She got assault charges and animal abuse charges from what I was told. Now I'd say that was justice served normally, but I can't help but feel an unholy hatred for her. I have become aware Ruby is now super skittish, even more than the other wallabies. She got a nasty bruise in her side. It's hard to see from afar, but after a month it persists. She still comes up to me, but only if no one else is around. During the day she tends to hide. That witch ruined Ruby's spirit, and for that I hope she rots in hell. Story 5. This happened months ago, just at the beginning of the COVID madness, and there were some legal issues involved that are now resolved. The verbal exchange is not exact, but it gives the gist of what happened, though I do remember most of the insults. Here is a little background about me. I'm a tiny, somewhat older lady, 5 foot tall and 49 years old, who looks rather unassuming. Most of my adult life, I've worked in probably every aspect of retail, from customer service to now owning a mid-size retail sporting goods store with a couple partners. So, I tend to give off that customer service vibe. I usually try to help people if I can, as long as they are polite. Also, I've been training in martial arts for more than 20 years and teach on the side as a way to give back to my community. My store is about a block away from a major big box retailer, rhymes with tall cart, and I often stop there because we always supply our employees with drinks and snacks to boost morale. Our management shirt is black and gray with a red logo embroidered over the pocket. I also have a mask that says the name of our store across it. The uniform of the store I'm in is either blue or yellow vest with big lettering on the back. On to the tale. One fine morning, on the way to my store, I stopped to pick up some soda and chips for my people and some janitorial supplies to hold me through until my next shipment arrives. It was early, so there were very few shoppers and not many employees. I'm filling my cart with soda, and because I have situational awareness, I notice a normal, if somewhat pudgy guy, we'll call him Kevin, walking up the aisle toward where I've just finished loading a few cases into my cart. I thought he wanted some soda, so I moved on to the next thing on my list. I go to the next aisle and notice this guy has followed me. Inwardly, I sigh to myself as I can see from his stance and his eyes that he is not happy. Kevin tromps up to me very aggressively and says, "What is your problem? You just walked away from me. I need some help." Since I always try to de-escalate aggressive behavior, I put on my sweet voice and said, "I'm sorry. Did you have a question about?" Insert my store name, which is written boldly across my mask. "What? No. Where is the Diet Mountain Dew? Why would I want to know anything about that store, you stupid cow?" "Well, maybe because I work there and not here. I have noticed that this store has not had Diet Mountain Dew for a while. Maybe you should ask an employee if they are back ordered." "Nonsense. You work here. I see you here every week." As he says this, he advances toward me. I step back a few paces. "Me? Sir, please keep your distance. We are in a pandemic." "Kevin, how dare you assume my pronouns? You are a piece of trash. Get me my Diet Mountain Dew." I was taken aback a bit. I apologize for making assumptions, but it still doesn't change the fact I don't work here. What would you prefer to be called? "Kevin. I prefer he/him/his. And don't you forget it. Anything else is hate speech. I know you have Diet Mountain Dew in the back. Now go get it, or I will have you fired for being discriminatory." Me. The word "sir" is a formal way of speaking to someone who identifies as he/him/his. I'm not discriminating. Anyway, I still don't work here. I will go find you an employee. At this point, 2 mistakes were made. One by me, one by Kevin. Mistake 1. I turned my back on an aggressor who was still agitated. Looking back, the only reason I can give is I just really wanted to get back to what I was doing so I could get to my store, and I honestly did not consider him a physical threat. Mistake 2. Kevin put his grubby booger hooks on me. He grabbed my shoulder in an attempt to turn me around, I suppose. So at this point, 20 years of martial arts training kicked in, and somehow Kevin ended up face down on the ground in a hammer lock with my knees shoved into his back. Using my best martial arts instructor voice, I yell, "Attention any employee. Please call 911 for the police. I have been assaulted." After a moment of shock, Kevin starts squealing. Not yelling, not crying or cussing. Squealing like a piglet. Suddenly, where there were no employees, there were at least 6 swarming us, including the manager. Since I had no idea what Kevin would do, I refused to release my hold on him until the police arrived. The local police show up. I recognize one as a regular customer at my store, who has also expressed interest in me teaching his kid at the dojo. He looks at me and looks at Kevin squealing on the ground, and I can see the amusement in his eyes. I let go of the squealing piglet, Kevin. That's when his tirade starts, of course. "Kevin, oh my God, officers, this is a hate crime. Arrest her, arrest her. She threw me to the ground. I only wanted to get some Diet Mountain Dew. She's the devil." Officer looks at him, about 6 foot, 180 pounds, and then me, 5 foot, 97 pounds, and just raises his eyebrows. Since no one really witnessed what happened, I asked the manager if the officers could review their security recordings. The aftermath of the whole thing was this: we were both briefly detained. The officers reviewed the tapes and told me I'm good to go. Kevin starts whining and saying, "It's not fair, she used hate speech against me." The officer I know asked, "What did she say, sir?" And of course Kevin flips and starts screaming nonsense. They are better at de-escalating than I am and get him calm. One of the employees helpfully brought a dictionary up on their phone for poor Kevin. He reads what the word "sir" means and kind of crumples in on himself. I wish I could say it ended there. Unfortunately, Kevin finally figured out where I do work. He began to call incessantly and made some threats that escalated into him coming to my store, causing some property damage, and being arrested. This time I did press charges and sued for libel and defamation. Officer signs his daughter up at my dojo. Story 6. My cousin's girlfriend had a baby around the same time I did, which if you've read my posts then you know all of this happened many years ago. My child was shunned and unwanted by my family, but my cousin's child was welcomed. Even though they were living off the system, and the mother was the child of illegal immigrants whom my family protected. As soon as this kid was born, my cousin started asking, then demanding I babysit because until my son started school, I was a stay-at-home mom while my husband worked. I watched the brat a few times, and he is incorrigible. He is violent, even to this day. He would not listen to me, would destroy my home, and ended up hitting my son in the face with a metal model car. When I told my cousin I wouldn't be watching him anymore, he didn't seem to take me seriously, and even had his dad try to bully me into watching the kid. The final straw was my son's birthday, and we had planned on going to a movie. We were getting ready to walk out of the door when I saw a vehicle pull up, and it took me a minute to register who it was. My uncle brought the child to the door along with my cousin's wife, and the exchange went like this. "Uncle, hello, we're dropping this child off for you to watch tonight because we've got somewhere to go." The somewhere turned out to be my other cousin, the uncle's other son's wedding reception, and because of the child's behavior, they didn't want him there. Me, I'm sorry, but we're getting ready to leave. I've also told you all that I'm not babysitting him anymore. At this point, I get my son into his coat and my husband comes into the foyer. "Husband, what's going on? Why is Uncle here with the kid?" Uncle replies, "We need you all to watch him for a while." My uncle had already set the kid down on the floor, and he was glaring at my kid. "Nope, we're going to a movie? You'll have to find someone else." "Well, take him with you then, or just don't go." "Ha, no to both of those. We're going now. Please get out of my home and take this kid with you." My uncle is a bully. He hates people telling him no. My husband and I walked outside with our child, and my husband told my uncle he needed to leave so we could lock the door. My uncle tried walking out of the door, leaving the kid inside. My husband says, "No, I said we aren't watching him. If you leave him here, I'll call the police for child abandonment because he isn't going with us." My uncle was livid. "What is the big deal? We can't take him to this event with us. Just watch him." Again, my husband told him no and that we were leaving. Uncle scooped the kid up and tried to put him in our car, and my husband told him we'd drop him at the police station if he did that. This kid was literally grabbing fistfuls of my uncle's hair and slamming his forehead into the side of my uncle's face. My husband locked the car doors once my son and I were inside, then proceeded to lock the front door. We pulled off with Uncle still standing in the driveway. This was back in the day of basic cell phones, and we turned ours off for our movie. I want to say it was The Day After Tomorrow we saw. My cousin and his wife were later investigated by Child Protective Services because of their child's behavior, especially when he started school and would violently attack teachers. My cousin's wife did have some words that night. She called us rich and entitled, saying it wasn't fair we treated her little angel like this. She even tried shoving him in on the driver's side when my husband went to get in the car. She would text me for weeks after this, telling me I shouldn't have everything I did and that her kid was more deserving.